The purpose of this bill is to set up the Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Agency, a standalone statutory body under the Department of Justice with responsibility for tackling domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. The establishment of this agency is welcome, and the Labour Party very much welcomes it, and it is in line with the state's international treaty obligations under the Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. Domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is a global problem and not just an Irish problem. At a European level, in an anonymised international survey, 27% of women reported that they had experienced some form of gender-based violence before the age of 15, while 26% reported experiencing some form of gender-based violence after the age of 15. And we know that abuse is systematically under-reported. People from groups who experience a high level of discrimination and exclusion are more likely to be victims and less able to access adequate help for it. This includes ethnic minorities, migrants, travellers, individuals with disabilities and members of the LGBTQ+ communities. Many governmental and non-governmental organisations are worried about an increase in the number of victims presenting to them and the system's inability to help people because they don't have the resources. For example, in December 2020, Safe Ireland reported they could not meet 808 requests for refuge due to lack of space, while Men's Aid reported that they missed 630 calls to their helpline in 2021, mainly due to resource constraints. The Court Service also noted delays of 6 to 16 weeks for domestic violence applications in some district courts. In 2022, there was a continued increase, 8% in domestic abuse incidents, with nearly 54,000 attended to by the Gardaí, compared with just under 50,000 incidents in 2021 and just over 44,500 in 2020. There is no doubt that the establishment of a dedicated agency by this bill is a vital component in achieving the goal of zero tolerance in Irish society of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. There are 8 listed functional areas of the agency which we would broadly support. There may be ways to enhance the bill through amendment, but a key point we in Labour want to make is that the success of this agency will absolutely depend on the budgetary and departmental resources allocated, and not just to the agency itself, but to a whole range of areas. It would take too long to address each listed proposed area of responsibility and the knock-on resource needed. However, there are 3 key areas we would like to highlight and discuss with the Minister today. The first area is around providing direct support to victims, including refugees. Under the bill, the agency is tasked with planning, coordinating and monitoring the development of refuge accommodation, providing support, including financial assistance, to service providers for the provision of relevant services and programmes. The extent to which the agency will be successful here will be utterly dependent on how much resource is made available both directly to the agency and through the agency to third parties. The danger here is that the agency becomes a convenient scapegoat for departmental failure if the government doesn't make the money available. A TUSLA 2022 review of the provision of accommodation for victims of domestic violence estimated that Ireland provides just fewer than 30% of the higher standard of family places necessary. The running cost of the agency is expected to be about £3.4 million per year. However, the agency will be responsible for allocating budgets to non-governmental bodies that provide services such as refuges, rape crisis centres and helplines for those who have experienced domestic and gender-based violence or are at risk. Close to £50 million was allocated in 2023 under the respective votes of the Department of Justice and the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth for activities that will transfer to the agency. The biggest question for government is how much resource do we need to get from 30% to 100% of places to the required standard? Is it another 100 million or 150 million? Because as sure as night follows day, without the additional resources, this agency will be set up to fail. The second area which we see as being key to success is the agency's role in coordinating, overseeing and supporting the delivery of relevant government strategies and plans. The success of the agency will be utterly dependent on how good these strategies are, how quickly the legal changes needed are implemented, and how much resource is put behind the people who have to do the work. Back in March, the National Women's Council, supported by and collaborating with the Department of Justice, released a very important report. A report on the intersection of the criminal justice, private family law and public law childcare processes in relation to domestic and sexual violence. The National Women's Council and the Department are to be commended on this excellent report. It highlights the absolute necessity of having a victim-centred approach, while at the same time ensuring the right to fair legal process for those accused. At present, we have a system which is incredibly hard on victims. At the heart of the issue is that someone who is the victim can end up going through 3 different law processes in relation to their case. I have heard too often women quoted as saying that the court case was worse than the rape, that the court case was worse than the abuse. To quote the report, one act or a series of acts of domestic or sexual violence can cause the activation of 2 and sometimes 3 distinct legal processes: the criminal justice process, the private family law process, and the public law childcare process, involving the same victim or victims and the same alleged perpetrator. While there is a very real factual overlap between all of these processes, legally these processes work more or less in isolation, despite the potential for real and beneficial liaison. Victims suffer as a result of this lack of coordination and collaboration between the various processes, as vital information which could serve to secure just outcomes is sometimes lost in the gaps between the 3 systems, never being brought to the attention of the judge deciding upon the particular issue at hand. So we have a situation where a judge in one part of the process is completely unaware of what has happened or is happening in other parts of the process, and this can lead to terrible outcomes for victims and for families. As part of the national strategy, there are a whole series of recommendations, some of which are excellent, but again, there are budgetary and resource implications for a whole range of departments and not just the Department of Justice. For example, we need far better training of judges, Gardaí and legal professionals. We need greater coordination between agencies and a far faster processing of cases. And at the heart of the delays here are a lack of investment in resources. We have a serious underinvestment in the legal system. We have a crisis in retention of criminal barristers that is putting court cases in this sphere at risk. For example, as recently as May of this year, a criminal trial for sexual assault had to be postponed because there was no senior barrister available to prosecute. But perhaps the biggest concern I have is around the chronic lack of trained social workers and social care workers, which creates a very real impediment to effectively supporting victims of such cases. The third point I would make concerns the structure of the bill and the ongoing relationship with civic society organisations. I know the Minister has accepted some of the National Women's Council recommendations, and there are a number of positive aspects of the bill following on from those recommendations, such as the inclusion of collection, management and assessment of statistical data in the functions of the agency, and the fact that the chairperson and members of the board will have experience and expertise in vital areas such as policy implementation, service delivery, advocacy and others in relation to domestic and sexual gender-based violence. However, I know the National Women's Council and other civil society organisations have highlighted in their recommendations the importance of continuing with the co-design model of the third national strategy and the lack of clear mechanisms for collaboration with civil society organisations in the previous bill. It is disappointing that civil society organisations are no longer mentioned in the bill when the third national strategy acknowledged this collaboration as a key principle for the Department of Justice in the detailed design phase of the setup for the agency will be to work with the specialist and community-based support organisations in a spirit of co-design to ensure that the new structure avoids the issue that limited effectiveness in the past. Hopefully, Minister, we can change this. So in conclusion, Minister, we in the Labour Party support this bill. There may be some need to strengthen the bill and the agency, but at the core of the issue is that, like in so many areas, the establishment of this agency and the implementation of all the policy and strategy changes recommended will be utterly futile without proper investment, not just in the agency itself, as I've said, but also in the NGOs and the education and communication programmes, but in the wider legal and social care system. We need to invest in the workers who deliver these services. We need to invest in the guards, the lawyers, the social workers and researchers, the NGO employees and everyone involved in the system to make sure that it doesn't become another agency, as I said, that is set up to fail. The key to the success of this agency and this bill lies not just in the Department of Justice, but at the heart of the government in the Department of Public Expenditure and Public Expenditure and Reform and the Department of Finance to see if they will put in the investment needed to make this a success. But as I said, Minister, at this point the Labour Party welcomes this bill and will work to improve it as it goes through the Houses.